Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today we look at Gone with a Trace, the 6th episode of Season 7 of Clone Wars. There will be spoilers, so run for the hills and hit that pause button if you haven't seen the episode yet. First off, I liked this episode. I did. It pushes all the right buttons. You feel the pain of the characters. These characters feel real. Their suffering feels real. You can't help but enjoy a show that makes such relatable characters. In that fond sort of way you like any well-written story that you've seen, heard, or read 100 times. Because we have already seen this episode before. We have seen it in a dozen other shows in every genre imaginable. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I lay my prejudices on the floor in plain sight. As an author, this episode is terribly predictable with just a few redeeming corkscrew plot twists. You know that this episode is going from point A to point B. Fortunately, it takes a few rabbit side trails on its way to get there. And to be perfectly honest, I rather think this episode had to begin this way. Just like the Bad Batch was burdened with completely reestablishing the world of the Clone Wars in one episode after years of absence, and this burden is enough to make any episode feel a bit blocky. Likewise, Gone with a Trace is burdened with reestablishing the story critical to the social dynamics of Coruscant, the glittering topside where the Senate rules and the Darth Sidious is slowly gaining his power, or what's his name? Darth whatever. Anyway, Palpatine. He's still Senator Palpatine, is slowly gaining power for his takeover above the gritty, choked air of the Undercity. The episode sets up the broken reputation of the Jedi, the resentment of the lower levels. This episode has a lot to do, and you feel it. Watching it did feel a little bit like reading a homework assignment. An enjoyable homework assignment, but a homework assignment nonetheless. However, I suspect that might be something only dedicated and long-term fans will feel. Most watchers who haven't seen this episode dozens of times in other genres yet, will probably only have the enjoyment of a spunky outcast in a strange new land adventure. Because Ahsoka Tano is really an outcast in this world. She is almost completely unprepared for it. The episode really manages to capture the feeling of being utterly lost and alone, a feeling that is only heightened by the fact that Ahsoka is still the hyper-competent Jedi commander that she was trained to be, but now she is utterly out of her depth. All of those skills that she mastered over her years of training in the temple and her years as a Padawan in the war are all but useless to her here. The genius of this episode is how it paints with empty space. Ahsoka is fumbling because her entire life she had a support network to reach out for even during the worst of times. You can feel her reaching for her comm to call Cody or Rex for backup. You can feel the dark, empty space inside her when she automatically reaches out through the Force for a fellow Jedi, only to stop with the pained reminder that she has rejected them and they are no longer waiting for her at the other end of her mind. Ahsoka isn't just lost, she's missing parts of herself. And the show really manages to show that in the opening scene, which is also a beautiful scene that takes full advantage of the fact that this is a purely animated show. And that first scene seems to revel in doing things that you could never do in a live action show. Sweeping views of the city, callbacks to the sequel trilogy. It really is beautiful. But I said we have seen this episode before, felt this pain before. My first time was watching this episode was as a tiny child at Christmas many years ago. Dad set us down and we watched a strange movie. It contrasted a glittering world of pleasure and decadence with a gritty world of smoke and war. It started and ended as a war story about a fiercely competent general, a general who was feared and respected by his men, a general who was left at loose ends by the end of his generalship, awkward and unable to manage in a world of having to earn his own money instead of requisitioning things, almost unable to cope with a world where you had to convince people with charm and logic to do things instead of ordering them around. But the middle of the movie was filled with dancing and singing and pretty colors and a rather cunning pair of sisters. One who was willing to perform any manipulation to get them what they needed, while still being loyal to her sister, and the other who adhered to a strict code of honor, who tried to do the right thing, and was often horrified by her sister's machinations. The general tries to help the sisters only to find out that they can help him, even if he finds their methods questionable and awkward. See? I told you we'd seen this episode before. And in the middle of the dancing and the glittering, there's a soft, soulful song about a general.
Oh, what can you do with a general who retires? Who's got a job for a general when he stops being a general? They all get a job but a general no one hires. They fill his chest with medals while he's across the foam, and they spread the crimson carpet when he comes marching home. The next day someone hollers when he comes into view, "Here comes the general," and they all say, "General who?"
Now, this is a strange comparison because this episode, this show, has the cloud of death hovering over it. These extraneous generals won't have to struggle for employment in the civilian world. They won't have to watch the rigid, controlled world that they created dissolve into please and thank you. They will all die at the hands of the slave army that was created specifically for that purpose. But here is one general who left before that tragedy, and she is struggling in a world where she can't give orders, she can't expect backup, and all of the skills she spent a lifetime honing are all but useless. And the show does have a few interesting twists. In this case, it is the older sister who is the unreliable one. You can tell she is not only taking morally ambiguous jobs, she is clearly wasting the borrowed money on boosters and other recreational drugs, leaving her little sister to take care of her. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, Ahsoka's plucky underdog light-sided heroism does not change the sister's behavior in any measurable way. The responsible sister squirms a little under the scrutiny of topside morals, but she still takes the money from the questionable job and calls doing that the right thing. The power of Ahsoka's good heart has no power here. And on an interesting side note, the debt collector characters, while he is definitely the antagonist, isn't shown as a villain. He is simply collecting on what is rightfully owed him. The show does not put the sisters in a morally superior place at all. They do not have the moral high ground. They, or rather the older sister with the younger sister as an accomplice, essentially stole the debt collector's money, and he is not in the wrong to want payment or to pursue payment, even if his methods are rough. So, this is a good episode with some decent corkscrew plot twists. It does what it can with what it has, and the following episodes will likely be better for its existence. And if you haven't seen White Christmas 40-odd times, it might not be overly familiar, and you will get to miss out on the feeling of having seen this episode before. So, what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Am I being too hard on this episode? Not hard enough? Leave a like below if you agree with me, and a comment blasting my analysis like a Death Star if you disagree. Peace out, my wonderful viewers. And what can you do with the general when he stops being a general?